I have made a video about nuclear power in the past, and I got a lot of criticism, constructive criticism. Like, people weren't mad at me, but it was like, hey, Tim, you should really read up on what's going on with nuclear power because a lot of the points I made were kind of old. But this story in the New York Times, I think, is fantastic. I'm not familiar who Joshua Goldstein, Stefan Akvist, I don't know who they are, but I know Steven Pinker. I think he was on Rogan. I think that's where I saw him. But I think he's loosely involved in like the intellectual dark web. And so I saw this and I was like, oh, cool. I don't know a lot about nuclear power. What I do know is that it's carbon neutral and that it could potentially save the world. To see this op-ed in the New York Times, I thought was fantastic. So let's read into it and see what the hell they're talking about. Expanding the technology is the fastest way to slash greenhouse gas emissions and decarbonize the economy. Makes sense. My understanding, too, is that the latest generation of nuclear technology can't melt down and can actually use old nuclear waste as fuel. So let's read. As young people rightly demand real solutions to climate change, the question is not what to do. Eliminate fossil fuels by 2050, but how? Beyond decarbonizing today's electric grid, we must use clean electricity to replace fossil fuels in transportation, industry, and heating. We must provide for the fast-growing energy needs of poor countries and extend the grid to 1 billion people who now lack electricity. And still more electricity will be needed to remove excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by mid-century. This is beautiful. This is beautiful for a couple reasons. For one, I love new technology. I love science. More importantly, though, how do you convince a conservative who doesn't think climate change, man-made climate change, is a legitimate threat and that greenhouse gases are a problem, and a liberal who does, to come together and do something that will make the world a better place? Bam! Nuclear energy. Now, one of the big problems is that the left is opposed to it out of fear for environmental reasons, and that's the big challenge. But in the end, we can see this, and we can say two things. To the left, this could curb carbon emissions. Sounds good, right? Yes. To the right, cheap and efficient, high energy return. Nuclear energy, it's my understanding, has a better return on energy investment than almost all of the other renewable energies. I think it rivals, it's lower than oil, I believe, but really, really high, which means good economic expansion. And that's what we need to talk about. Technology, making the world a better place, better living through technology. Where will this gargantuan amount of carbon-free energy come from? The popular answer is renewables alone, but this is a fantasy. Bingo. Wind and solar power are becoming cheaper, but they are not available around the clock. Rain or shine. And batteries that could power entire cities for days or weeks show no sign of materializing anytime soon. Today, renewables work only with fossil fuel backup. Germany, which went all in for renewables, has seen little reduction in carbon emissions. And according to our calculations, at Germany's rate of adding clean energy relative to gross domestic product, it would take the world more than a century to decarbonize, even if the country wasn't also retiring nuclear plants early. A few lucky countries with abundant hydroelectricity like Norway and New Zealand have decarbonized their electric grids. But their success cannot be scaled up elsewhere. The world's best hydro sites are already damned. Small wonder that a growing response to these intimidating facts is we're cooked. But we actually have proven models for rapid decarbonization with economic and energy growth. You know what that means? It means, again, you can tell the left, we'll get rid of those carbon emissions. You tell the right, we got economic and energy expansion. Good news all around for everybody. Let's make it happen. France and Sweden, they decarbonized their grids decades ago and now emit less than 1/10 of the world's average of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. They remain among the world's most pleasant places to live and enjoy a much cheaper electricity than Germany to boot. They did this with nuclear power, and they did it fast, taking advantage of nuclear power's intense concentration of energy per pound of fuel. Yes. France replaced almost all of its fossil-fueled electricity with nuclear power nationwide in just 15 years. Sweden in about 20 years. In fact, most of the fastest additions of clean electricity historically are countries rolling out nuclear power. I'm stoked. This is amazing. This is a realistic solution to humanity's greatest problem. Plants built 30 years ago in America, as in France, produce cheap, clean electricity, and nuclear power is the cheapest source in South Korea. The 98 U.S. reactors today provide nearly 20% of the nation's electricity generation. So why don't the United States and other countries expand their nuclear capacity? The reasons are economics and fear. I used to work for Greenpeace, and they went around claiming that nuclear power was dangerous. I don't want to say to what extent, because I don't remember. It's been like a decade. But I remember at least the rhetoric among the staff was like, we don't want this. We don't want this. And then I started researching it, and I looked into Patrick Moore, who was he was a founder, and he was saying, no, we do. This is a really good idea. If we can advance technology, it's a great thing. But nuclear is scary. And so you can convince people to donate by scaring them. And this is bad news for the world. It is greed, and it's on the left, and it's stopping us from implementing real solutions, at least partly. New nuclear power plants are hugely expensive to build in the United States today. This is why so few are being built, but they don't need to be so costly. The key to recovering our lost ability to build affordable nuclear plants is standardization and repetition. The first product off any assembly line is expensive. It costs more than $150 million to develop the first iPhone, but costs plunge as they are built in quantity and production kinks are worked out. Yet as former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission put it, while France has 2 types of reactors and hundreds of types of cheese, in the United States, it's the other way around. In recent decades, the U.S. and some European countries have created ever more complicated reactors with ever more safety features in response to public fears. New one-of-a-kind designs, shifting regulations, supply chain and construction snafus, and a lost generation of experts during the decades when new construction stopped have driven costs to absurd heights. Maybe the Green New Deal doesn't need to be this ridiculous plan of rebuilding buildings and getting rid of farting cows, but just a simple tax incentive on the construction of new nuclear plants. Incentives, meaning, Ocasio-Cortez, we're not going to give money to people. We're just going to make it so that we can help offset the costs with tax incentives so they're not dumping too much money into government, the government cut, and they can build things that can actually make the world a better place. Incentivize it, right? These economic problems are solvable. China and South Korea can build reactors at 1/6 the current cost in the U.S. South Korea is a big ally. Let's bring them in. With the political will, China could replace coal without sacrificing economic growth, reducing world carbon emissions by more than 10%. In the longer term, dozens of American startups are developing 4th-generation reactors that can be mass-produced, potentially generating electricity at lower cost than fossil fuels. If American activists, politicians, and regulators allow it, these reactors could be exported to the world in the 2030s and 40s, slaking poorer countries' growing thirst for energy while creating well-paying American jobs. Currently, 4th-generation nuclear power receives rare bipartisan agreement in Congress, making it a particularly appealing American policy to address climate change. Congress recently passed the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act by big margins. Both parties love innovation, entrepreneurship, export, and jobs. I think we got here a workable solution for the left and the right. I probably made it clear. This approach will need a sensible regulatory framework. Currently, as MIT's Richard Lester, a nuclear engineer, has written, a company proposing a new reactor design faces the prospect of having to spend $1 billion or more on an open-ended, all-or-nothing licensing process without any certainty of outcomes. We need government on the side of this clean energy transformation, with supportive regulation, streamlined approval, investment in research, and incentives that tilt producers and consumers away from carbon. All this, however, depends on overcoming an irrational dread among the public and activists, and there it is. The reality is that nuclear power is the safest form of energy humanity has ever used. Mining accidents, hydroelectric dam failures, natural gas explosions, and oil train crashes all kill people, sometimes in large numbers, and smoke from coal burning kills them in enormous numbers, more than 500,000 per year. By contrast, in 60 years of nuclear power, only 3 accidents have raised public alarm. 3 Mile Island, which killed no one. Fukushima in 2011, which killed no one, but let's be real, Fukushima is a major disaster still, and we're still facing the ramifications today. Many deaths resulted from the tsunami, and some from a panicked evacuation near the plant. And some people, I believe in Fukushima, I don't know if they're dead yet, but yes, I believe so, because they have to go in to try and stop the disaster. It's been bad, for sure. And Chernobyl in 1986, the result of extraordinary Soviet bungling, which killed 31 in the accident and perhaps several thousand from cancer. Around the same time, killed by coal emissions every day. Even if we accepted recent claims that Soviet and international authorities covered up tens of thousands of Chernobyl deaths, the death toll from 60 years of nuclear power would still equal about 1 month of coal-related deaths. Nuclear power plants cannot explode like nuclear bombs, and they have not contributed to weapons proliferation. Thanks to robust international controls, 24 countries have nuclear power but not weapons, while Israel and North Korea have nuclear weapons but not power. Not the same thing. Nuclear waste is compact. America's total from 60 years would fit in a Walmart and is safely stored in concrete casks and pools, becoming less radioactive over time. After we have solved the more pressing challenge of climate change, we can either burn the waste as fuel in new types of reactors or bury it deep underground in a far easier environmental challenge than the world's enormous coal waste, routinely dumped near poor communities and often laden with toxic arsenic, mercury, and lead that can last forever. Okay, I don't want to go on too long, but let's read the conclusion. There's only a little bit left. They say, if the American public and politicians can face real threats and overcome unfounded fears, we can solve humanity's most pressing challenge and leave our grandchildren a bright future of climate stability and abundant energy. We can dispatch once and for all the self-fulfilling prophecy that we're cooked. We're not. Nuclear technology. I wanted to make sure I just read heavily into what they were saying because the video I made about this before, again, I got a lot of my points, they were wrong, they were old, but I was pointing in the right direction that nuclear energy is a good thing. It is. And I think it's the solution for the left and the right. So if we can get people to actually sit down and have an honest conversation about this, nuclear energy can save the world. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. Stick around. I'll have more videos starting tomorrow. I will see you then.